Alrighty, so week 16, we only have one more attendance post for next week, and that's it. It's so quickly coming to an end, and I very much appreciate the this in the RL in the real world for me. I'm at Monday of week 15, and I've read the posts that have come in regarding advice to future students, and boy, do I appreciate that. And it was interesting reading because you are the best folks to give advice. I mean, as instructors, we try to give advice, but I think it's more meaningful coming from students. So I am definitely using some of that content for next semester. Okay, so what I want to talk about before we get into the parts that you need to do for the grading part of this item is actually to talk about a concept that if you were taking my JavaScript course, you've heard me refer to. It's a CRUD app. So the ability of some kind of code to create, to read, to update, and to delete some information from the user is a concept that I'm just going to tell you you're going to hear in the future because it's a category of apps. Because most apps implement one, if not all, of these particular, right? If we break them down, these particular functionality into their code base. But for us in this class, right, we could almost reorganize the class in some ways around CRUD. But it wouldn't have been in the order we took it in, but I still think it would have been a fun, just to kind of wrap your head around. So the create is when we could think of create as when we were designing the databases and then where we were in writing to the databases, right? So that would be two ways that we could create. But also, well, no, those would be the primaries. And then the reads was really at the beginning where we spent most of the time learning how to query first both single tables and then how to run queries in different ways to give us the data we needed. And then we looked at, how to then use functions like max and sum so to aggregate data. Right? And then update. Update's so important, right? We saw this, the ability to run triggers to do updates, to actually do inserts, or to find a particular item and give it a new value. I mean, there were multiple ways that we saw the update and the delete. Now, on the delete, we saw what's called soft deletes, but we also saw the ability to just delete an entry in a table as well. But then we saw if you had constraints on that, right, there was issues there. But, I mean, so this is an organizing principle that I'm just going to tell you, if you haven't heard, that you will hear at some point in your technical career because somebody will say, hey, that's just a CRUD app. And if you've never heard it, I want you to know what it is because so much of this course is really about these concepts. Okay, so that's the one thing. So now let's talk about the graded stuff for this week. So this week, as I had told you last week, I was going to have you do the optimizing lecture. And so for the graded content, what you will do is the first 20 minutes of the optimizing lecture, I've given you a link here. But you don't take notes. This week, I was actually trying to walk away from notes this week and just have you code, but I couldn't because of the content that was in the lecture. But I leaned into the idea of coding more than taking notes. But when Carter got to some really important topics like acid and you'll learn what that means this week. And by the way, that's another one of those terms that we haven't really talked about at all, except when we get to this, but is in the industry a very common thing that somebody will say, have you acid tested your database? Making sure that it conforms to each of those letters in the acid acronym. But anyway, my point about this one was more that I wanted to have you do more actual coding than taking notes. Although, by the way, it might be interesting as well, now that you're used to doing both, I'm going to have you do feedback on the ICAs, but think about too, like, has it been helpful to have you stop and do notes? Because I know many of you have referred back to notes, which is, by the way, totally really okay. I think I saw somebody worried that they had looked at their notes too much. It's like, no, that's your notes are there to help you. Beside the topic. Okay, so for this one, for the first 20 minutes for the post here, what I want you to do is actually do a little bit of determining what the decrease in time is, because one of the really important things we're learning about this week is indexes, and how creating indexes makes a lot of sense because it speeds up queries and the time it takes to run queries on large data sets. Like, so the movie database that you're going to see this week is a good example if you don't know about the IMDb. They actually take the IMDb and they kind of pull out a lot of content that's in there, and there's still a lot of content. So what you're going to do here is no notes, but you need to post the output of your timer, and you'll create it. Okay, and I'll show you in a minute an example of mine. I put it in the notes. And then in your post, talk about a decrease in percentage of time using the index, and this is how much you get for this particular one. So as an example, and I'll just move over to here, right? So in this very first top part here, again, what you're doing is writing queries, just standard select queries for Cars to find Cars the movie. And you learn something called explain query plan, which, by the way, explain query plan actually does slow down the output as well, but we're running it on both the first select and then creating the index and then running it again. And so what happens here, and you'll learn about this timer on, timer on, and then so you'll turn the timer on, right? So write all the code first, just in the first 20 minutes. Don't worry too much about taking notes. You can refer to what you're going to ultimately need, but ultimately you're going to rearrange it in this way, right? Because you'll end up through note taking creating the index. So first you'll drop the index. Then you'll run the query to find Cars using the explain query, which you'll learn this term called scan, which is basically it's just scanning through, which is a slowest way of finding content. And so you get this timer, right, which is the real time, the user, and the system. And what we're going to focus on is the user output of that. Okay, and then you're going to create the index. Now this also has a time associated with it, but we won't use this one as our calculation of the decrease of time based on the query. And then so this is creating the query, and then you'll run the query plan, explain query plan running the select. And this time what's really cool is you can see that it's actually using the index here. Okay. And so then you'll get the output of that. So what you can see here is on the user, right? So here's the user for not using the index, and here's using the index. So you can clearly see a decrease of time. So then I just gave you the calculation. So you take the original one minus the new one divided by the original one. So you divide, and then times 100 gives you that percentage, and then you can just express it as a percentage, right? So in your post, and I just gave you the formula as well, and this is where you would create your timer report done. So so when you're ready, you actually output this to, do I say in here? I'll need to double check this. You do want to output this to a file. Oh yeah, output to timer. So first get it done, and then in your post, right? So in your post, you can just copy and paste the output of that timer, but you do want to have it also, of course, out there so that when I look at it, I see that as well, right? So you're going to go through the first 20 minutes. You're going to follow the process of learning about how to turn the timer on, how to look at the timer, how to explain query, like how does queries just run by scanning. Then you'll learn about how to create indexes, and then you'll run another query, which is based on the index, and you'll have a comparison. So as an example, mine, I saw, and now this is going to vary as well because part of this will also be because this is user time, right? So we could break this into talking about the different outputs of the timer to talk about that. But in this case, I'm just going to look at timer because yours definitely is probably going to be different than mine, and mine's probably going to be a little higher because I run local, right? If you're running code space, it's probably going to be a little slower, but who knows? Because then you're also dependent, and this is really also important to think about, is like when a user is running query, it's not just your query that affects their responsiveness or the responsiveness of the code to their question, to their query, but it would be also their internet, their platform, what other things are they running, right? All these things would go into that. But in this case, right, I'm just giving you a sample of this. And actually, after this, you stop at 20, but he actually starts talking about covering queries, and I thought that was a great discussion to go into as well. All right, so you'll just do up to creating that in your post, and then talk about your decrease of time, and that'll be 4.4 of that one. So now the other item I want to have you give me some feedback on. Like I've since the beginning of the semester, as you may or may not remember, the ICAs that we've been using are based on a platform that I have been working with Rick Gomez. Some of you might be taking his CIT 85, my version of that course that he's teaching this semester. And him and I have worked together to create this interface that allows an instructor to prompt and then interact with the student and submit into Canvas. And I would say that when I look back at my original ICAs, I've definitely, I feel like, gotten better at trying to craft a good prompt. But you've now been through several iterations of this. So your feedback would be really helpful to me and to us. Like there are certain things I know we've got to fix for the UI, the user interface part of this needs to be fixed. There's definitely some stuff on the back end, like when, what was it, viewing, I put way too much content in, which created a different problem. But it's also, we have to think about how do we, and this is called RAG, how do we do retrieval augmented to where we can just bind it to an amount of data that we want to get better responses. It's something Rick and I are talking about as well, but that's beside the point. The point is that I really want to get from you. And yeah, this is the second week what I've asked for feedback because if you don't know this, right, think about this. You're the customer and I'm the business trying to produce a product that is helpful to you. And this is why businesses always ask for your feedback because your feedback is really important. Like here's some of the things I'd like to hear from you in the discussion. Do you feel, because there, and by the way, we used ICAs in different ways. Like I gave them to help with some of the problem sets. Lately, I've been using them to help see how well you've translated the concepts, right? So do you feel the ICAs have been helpful to you? And if so, how? It would be really great to hear that, okay? So that's the second item. And again, I just gave that as an example. There could be other ways, like you could say, it was clunky and it didn't give me, or maybe like it gave me the answer too fast. May not be a problem for you, but in a sense, it's not what we wanted the ICAs to do. Really, the ICAs are intended to help you get to the solution without giving you the solution, but it's hard to actually get LLMs not to do that. And then sometimes it may have given you false information. I saw a couple examples of that as I was reviewing content as well. All right, so feedback, and by the way, again, make this a separate paragraph so I can clearly see it. So I should see the output of this, a calculation of the decrease of time, and then do one reply and probably do that reply to the ICA. I mean, if you want to do it to the other one, but I'd really like to see a bit of a conversation about these your feedback and the ICAs themselves. All right, so let's talk about the only item you have due this week. So let me actually go to the next one. So in this case, I haven't even posted it. I'm glad I looked at this. Actually, let's go back. this was on the, what does this one do? Hold on, pause. Oh, that's right. I was going to make this optimizing due on Thursday, but I realized in doing that, Thursday is actually Thanksgiving. So here's the deal. I'm going to have some flexibility around this optimizing, right? So, I will give you, I would say get it done and out of the way so you can move on to other things. By the time you see this, I will have already had 17 done, so you could actually finish up as well. But in this case, right, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as the 25th, and I won't go in there and put a 0 until we come back from Thanksgiving. So get it done. Now, let's actually go look at this because I ended up, when I went through this, is I was going to do, like I said, I was going to do just notes. But in this case, I ended up doing, in this first part, I'm sorry, just code along, but I ended up on the second part doing notes because it was a very important, and he spent a whole section there talking about acid and some other stuff as well. So I have you do a little of both, and then he has you run what's called a vacuum command. But in this case, one of the things is this whole concept of what I had you do for attendance, you're going to end up writing the covering indexes as well. And then I want you to do that similar thing for there, right? And after that, he talks about the btrieve, which, by the way, really good content to have in there, right? So I do end up having you create a README file on this part, but up here, I just have you create that comparison, that timed like we did on the attendance, right? So you'll use that same calculation. And again, write your queries so that you have it before you do the index, turn the timer on, output it after so that you can do that comparison. And that's what I will look for in your notes. And what I also did is I didn't do the last two segments, the race conditions and locks, but really good content to go over because I looked at the amount of content, and the idea was not to, because normally we spend 2 days going over the lecture. So I decided that we would stop at least there. And then I'm already looking at how we're going to do week 17. But anyway, so when you're going through the notes, when you're starting into the work itself, keep in mind in this first segment right here is that you're going to do something similar, but I don't actually make you create the timer.txt, or actually maybe I do. I create a proof of work there. But I actually showed you mine decreased by 99% by doing the covering indexes. So good to know. All right, so I hope that helps you. You do not have to do the last two segments of the lecture. And other than that, you do, and you have to go get this very small database for banking. And I really like that they talk about transactions, because learning how transactions work, how rollbacks work, very good stuff to conceptually understand. Okay, all right, have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.